Good evening, everyone. It's great to have so many of you joining us for our final Welfare Matters webinar of 2023. Very warm welcome to those joining for the first time, and it's great to see many familiar names of people who've joined us before as well. So we do hope these webinars have been useful to you, and we plan to continue hosting them next year as well. So do feel free to give us any feedback on topics you'd like to see covered, or any other feedback you have. So just a gentle reminder before we start, we want this to be a safe space for everyone to express their views, so let's all help to keep the tone respectful. Before handing over to our guest speaker, Dr. Natasha Lee, we'll start with a brief overview of the animal agriculture landscape in Malaysia for land animals to set the scene. And then Dr. Lee will be talking more about the welfare issues in detail. And much of this information I'm sharing is from the Welfare Matters Report, State of Animal Farming in Southeast Asia, which you can find on our website. So starting with some key points about Malaysia. Similar to what we find in other countries, broiler chickens are farmed in much larger numbers than any other land animals. Malaysia has a significant broiler chicken and chicken and egg industries. And a lot of the chicken meat and eggs produced are for domestic consumption, but a lot are also exported to Singapore as well. Pork is the second most important livestock industry within the country. And the farming of poultry and pigs is dominated by commercial enterprises as opposed to the traditional backyard farms, which are found more in other countries. Okay, so we know Malaysia produces a lot of chickens. We can look at some figures of the number of chickens that were slaughtered in recent years to get some idea of the scale of the issue. So we see in 2021, nearly 623 million chickens were slaughtered. Malaysia produced 1.54 million tons of chicken meat last year. So we see it is a huge industry. As mentioned, a lot of this is for domestic consumption. Malaysians do eat a lot of poultry. A very recent survey actually revealed that on average, Malaysians consume 48 kilograms of poultry per person per year. So that's roughly 1 kilogram per week. So this is actually one of the highest of all the countries surveyed. So it's a very big consumer. A lot of chicken is exported, as mentioned before, both live birds and as processed products. In 2019, nearly 70 million live chickens were exported to Singapore, mainly to Singapore, other countries as well, but mostly to Singapore. So we can see that this is an issue, the live transportation, live export of chickens. What are the chicken farms like? Well, there are two main types of broiler chicken farms in Malaysia: the commercial farms that run a business on a contract farming basis, and also conventional farms belonging to independent farmers. We can see from this chart that it's actually from 10 years ago. These are the most recent accurate data we could find for the sizes of the farms. But we can see that even then, over half were the medium or large scale farms. And today, this figure is probably a lot more medium and large scale farms. Large scale farms, we're talking about over 50,000 broilers being produced per cycle of 5 to 7 weeks. Medium scale farms carry 20,000 to 50,000 broilers. So these are pretty large farms. Backyard farming of native chickens is mainly for subsistence farming. It only accounts for about 1% of commercial production of poultry. So we are talking about big commercial broiler farms in Malaysia. The government is keen to grow and modernize the domestic broiler chicken industry even further, promoting the use of modern technology, automation, and closed house systems. Many subsidies have been given to chicken farmers in recent years to support the industry, particularly to cover the high cost of chicken feed. And Malaysia has plans to produce all of its own chicken for domestic consumption and export at least 30% of what it produces by 2030. So we can see it's very important to the government. Moving on to ducks. which also comes under the poultry. It is actually quite hard to find details of how ducks are farmed a bit in Southeast Asia, but for all the countries, we've been having this issue. We do have some figures though. Over 22 million ducks were slaughtered for food in Malaysia in 2022. Over 70,000 tons of duck meat produced that same year. I believe that duck meat and eggs are fairly popular foods in Malaysia as well. And Malaysia produced 355 million duck eggs in 2020. So it is quite a significant industry as well. Moving on to the pork industry, the second most important livestock industry commercially. In January 2022, there were 437 pig farms recorded. Small farms are being replaced by bigger farms. The number of farms in Peninsular Malaysia is decreasing, but farm size is actually growing, with pig numbers remaining fairly stable. So there is this move towards bigger farms. Currently, a large majority of pig farms in Peninsular Malaysia are still operating as the traditional open house systems, like you can see in this photo, which are open to the air. But the government, the Department of Veterinary Services, strongly encourages a modern pig farm system, whereby pigs are kept in closed house systems. They say this increases productivity, efficiency, and reduces the risk of disease transmission. And Penang actually became the first state to mandate that traditional farms must convert to the modern pig farming systems. So pig farming is actually quite heavily regulated within the various states, and there are specific licensing regulations. And a lot of this is due to issues with pig farms causing a lot of pollution in the past. Some pork is for domestic consumption. Pork has been fairly popular in Malaysia, but there is some evidence that its popularity is decreasing. But a lot of pork products and live pigs are exported to Singapore. We'll have a quick mention of the beef, cattle and sheep and goat farming as well. Just a quick mention because these are on a fairly small scale. It's primarily practiced by smallholders. Most of the beef, mutton and goat meat is actually imported, but still it's worth mentioning because these animals are being farmed. Moving on to eggs, Malaysia is a major producer of chicken eggs in the region. Over 105 million layer hens living on farms in 2021. There's a high domestic consumption of eggs within Malaysia, chicken eggs. Some are exported to Singapore as well. And as we see in, I think, every country, the majority of layer heads on commercial farms are housed in battery cages. But it is very encouraging to see a cage-free movement is definitely developing in Malaysia and getting stronger. And we'll be hearing more from Dr. Lee about this. Finally, to the dairy industry. So consumption of milk is increasing in Malaysia quite substantially. Currently, over half of the country's milk is imported, but the government wants to change this with plans to be self-sufficient in terms of milk by 2025. And last year, the government was actually offering incentives for people to set up dairy farms. So it's something the government seems quite keen to promote. So that was just a very, very quick overview of what's happening in Malaysia in terms of animal agriculture. And it gives me great pleasure to introduce Dr. Natasha Lee, our guest speaker tonight. Dr. Lee is a veterinarian from Malaysia with a master's in international animal welfare, ethics and law from the University of Edinburgh. She's a member of the Australian and New Zealand College of Veterinary Scientists, Animal Welfare. Dr. Lee has almost 20 years of experience in international animal welfare, ranging from project management, shelter medicine, veterinary education, and farm animal assessment. She's managed large welfare projects across Asia, which include strategy development, advocacy, and technical training. She led a campaign to include animal welfare science in veterinary curricula across Asia by providing training to more than 125 vet schools, starting a network of animal welfare educators, and conducting online courses. She currently runs an animal welfare consultancy, Animal Happiness, which works with other organizations to carry out training, education, audits, and project management. So over to you, Dr. Lee.
Thank you. Thank you so much for the very elaborate introduction. Let's see. Start the presentation. So thanks again, Amy, and to everybody else that's here. Welcome to tonight's presentation. So thank you again for coming, sacrificing maybe an hour plus of your time to listen to this talk. So I hope that it will be a useful talk for you guys in terms of getting information. So our areas of focus for this presentation will be looking at farm animal, and in particular in Malaysia. We are going to look at certain concerns in terms of the challenges for welfare issues in farm animals. And I'm going to go into very detail into chicken farming and more specifically in terms of egg farming, so laying hens. And I'm going to mention a little bit of welfare concerns with the other species that's raised here in Malaysia. So in Malaysia, I think Amy has given you quite a good overview, and I think the numbers match some of the numbers that I found. So every year, our Department of Veterinary Services compiles some statistics on the number of animals that we have, and also the amount of animal products that we produce. I think in terms of this table here, I'll highlight some of the things that are useful to see. So what Amy has mentioned is correct. So our main industry is actually poultry industry. So we do eat a lot of chickens. We are raising quite a lot of chickens. In fact, this number might not represent the number that's being slaughtered. I haven't gotten that number from the statistics that the Department of Veterinary Services produce, but we can see that it produces at least 1.6 million tons of poultry meat, chicken meat every year. So, but what does that mean in terms of local consumption? And at this moment, at this stage, if we look at 2021 or 2022 data, we produce about 100% of our poultry consumption needs within the country. In fact, if we look across the different years, we usually produce slightly more than what is needed for our local consumption. I think usually on average is about 105, 104%, something like that. So we do have a very small export market for poultry. Eggs is quite similar as well. We can fulfill the local consumption, which also again is quite a high number. So Malaysians eat a lot of poultry, meat, and egg products as our main source of protein. But also the second most important animals is swine. The second group of animals is swine or pigs, where we look at producing about maybe almost 2 million pigs every year in order to fulfill, I think, most of our local needs. We do import a little bit to cover the deficiency in pork consumption. But for a lot of the other animals, the other animal products, our self-sufficiency production is not quite there. So we do depend on a lot more import for these other animals. But aside from these animals that are the main animal farming here in Malaysia, we do have other farmings as well, but on a rather much smaller number. This does not include fisheries, so fish and shrimp, but also some animals, like for example frogs. It's not under any particular department, so there is nobody that's actually tracing these animals and regulating how they are farmed. So I'll go into a little bit more detail on egg production. Egg production generally in Malaysia and also in probably in a lot of other countries in Southeast Asia is one of the cheapest animal protein that can be obtained, and it's can be given to the public. So if we are looking at more of a developing nation, perhaps the people would consume more eggs than animal protein of any other nature. So eggs is quite an important industry here in Malaysia, as well as I believe in a lot of other Southeast Asian countries as well. So a lot of times when the government looking at initially starting to develop the industry, we are looking first at developing the egg industry. Of course, then broiler and chicken meat industry will come in side by side as well, because that chicken meat would be also another way of getting cheaper animal protein. But back to egg farming, and a lot of times when we're looking at farming in a large scale, we are looking at very intensive type of farming. So farms like this is quite typical, where you see chickens in battery cages and in rows and rows, and also in multi-layers. So this is quite a big farm. You have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 rows. So we have this is quite a intensive and large scale farm for eggs. But at the same time, if a lot of this is maybe the big companies that they can afford this kind of farming, but also we do have maybe a medium scale farms where it looks something like this. A lot of the cages that you see would be something like what do you call that, like not mass produced, but maybe it's produced in a smaller scale kind. Or sometimes even some farms, they might have somebody who are skilled enough to put together their own system, their own cages. But still, at the end of the day, it is still quite focused on actually keeping the animals within a very small confined space. So they are still considered battery cages. This is taken from Indonesia, which is a little bit more of a backyard farming system. Fortunately, I don't see this much in Malaysia. So in terms of backyard farming, we don't have this. But just to share with you guys that backyard farming for eggs doesn't mean it's always cage free. So sometimes it can be kept in cages as well. And a lot of times, if you see some of these cages, a lot of the cages would be very barren. Let me show you the other one. So a lot of these cages that you see in the battery cages would be quite barren and quite in terms of animal welfare, it doesn't fulfill animal welfare needs. So what can we see here? So obviously space is one of the major problems here that you see. I think I mean, if you are well aware of the battery cage farming industry, you probably have heard that each chicken might have a space as much as an A4 size paper or a letter size paper, so a sheet of paper per chicken. And that's generally true for a lot of battery cages. They are usually kept in small cages like this. It's not rather than individual. A battery cage will keep a group of chickens. So here we can see, for example, 4 or 5 chickens here in this cage, and this is quite typical battery cage farming. It's also, as I mentioned earlier on, it's barren, so there's nothing for the chickens to do except, well, eat, sleep, and lay eggs. There is no nest that's provided for these chickens, because nest is actually quite an important behavior for these chickens. When they want to lay eggs, they will actually seek nest, and the nest has to be somewhere quiet, somewhere where they can, have substrate around so that they can feel that they can scratch around and make their own nest before they lay eggs. It's important behavior for chickens. And on the ground in battery cages, you can just see wired floors or metal floors, so that, I mean, like in a way, this it's easier for them to manage the chicken poop, because underneath those cages would have a conveyor belt system, so they can actually channel all the feces towards one end of the houses, so it's actually quite easy to dispose. But that also means that the chickens would be standing on this wired floor for the rest of its life, basically. So there's no litter for these chickens. So how does it affect the welfare? Well, of course, primary thing with all these things that are not provided for the chickens, you can see that it will affect its natural behavior. So that the chickens can't stretch, they can't fly, they can't walk, they can't exercise, and importantly, they can't stay away from the more dominant individual. So if it's a cage that of a small size like this, you can see a lot of what we called feather pecking. That's because maybe the dominant one will peck the weaker ones, but also feather pecking is a problem because they are not fulfilled with the other natural behavior. So become frustrated or become very bored, and then you just peck each other's feathers. So feather plucking is quite a bad sign for animal welfare, and we can see this extensively in battery cages. What else do chickens need? They need to dust bathe. So if you see not natural birds, sometimes you'll see them on a patch of sand and they'll ruffle their feathers around. That's a way for them to stay cool, but also it's a way for them to keep their feathers clean as well. Nesting, as I mentioned earlier on, there is a huge urge for hens to nest, do a nesting behavior before they lay the eggs. Foraging, this is where, if you see chickens naturally, they spend most of the time foraging for food. But also they are curious little creatures, so they will forage and try to peck around, explore things. Perching is also very important behavior for birds, and chickens are included as well. So perching includes having a stick that is easy for them to wrap their feet around the stick, and usually they will perch when they're resting. They can perch while they're sleeping at night. And this perching behavior actually helps them to exercise their legs. So without that ability to exercise their legs, they can have a lot of health problems. So they can have a lot of bone and fractures, muscle related problem, but also look at the floor that they are standing on. So they're standing on wire floor a lot of times. So they do get quite a lot of foot problems as well. And with a lot of times when they are given like very high nutrition, high fatty type of food, they can actually have a lot of metabolic problems as well. And all this also results with poor mental health. So it's a problem with battery cages. You have their restriction in behavior, you have problems with their physical health, and then you also have problems with their mental health. So if you Google battery cage chickens, you can see lots of pictures of how it looks like at the end of their laying period. So at the end of their productive period, before they are sent to be culled and to replace with another batch of chicken, a lot of them would lose quite a lot of feathers, and a lot of them would look at like this kind of condition. So they are skinny, they are they don't have that much feathers, but this can be temporary. So a lot of people can actually rehabilitate the chicken back to good looking. But in cage-free system, it is possible at the end of the same cycle for chickens to look like this at the end of the cage-free system cycle. So it's important for us to pay attention to chicken welfare while we are managing the animal, even if it's in a cage-free system. So I would say the pressure to go into cage-free system or to actually focus on chicken welfare, a lot of it comes from the European Union when they started looking at battery cages and how bad it is for chicken welfare. The policy to actually start to ban entirely ban battery cages in the Europe, but it does have an implication here in Asia because it starts to disrupt the export market for some of the bigger companies that will export to Europe. But also a lot of times people become more aware as well, and also change is inevitable and it is coming. So a lot of times, even though it's happening there in Europe, but here as well, producers, even the public, like us as well, we are well aware of the needs for chicken welfare. So in Europe, they have these cages are in Europe. Instead of battery cages, they call this enriched cages. So these are an example of a type of moving away from battery cages. So we have these enriched cages, which does provide some resources for the chickens. As I mentioned earlier on, some of the welfare needs for the chickens, for example, they have perches here. Inside here is the nest box, so they can actually nest, nest in slight privacy. You also have some substrates that have been given for them for their foraging and scratching behavior. So some behaviors can be actually what do you call that, like provided in the enriched cages, but at the end of the day, enriched cages like this are still cages, so it's not quite cage-free system. So even in the Europe now, you can see some lobbying happening to completely ban all types of cages. So what's the alternative? We have cage-free systems. You can have cage-free systems that are low-tech like this, that looks very simple. And you can also have cage-free systems that are slightly more intensive, that is the intention is to replace the intensive farming. So you can actually still do it quite intensively, but also still provide for the welfare of a lot of the chickens here that you see. One step better than a cage-free system where the chickens can, run around, walk around, have a little bit more freedom in terms of movement, and also you providing all the substrates and resources that's needed for the chicken. So we have the next step is a free-range system. Free-range system does not mean that chickens live outside forever. Usually, they still come into the barn for their nesting. Here's the nest boxes. They will still come into the barn for perching and also for food and water. But every day they're allowed to go outside, unless, of course, the weather is bad. Then maybe they are allowed to go outside only a shorter time period, perhaps. So they have access to outside, and then at night they will be come back in for them to roost, and you can close the door so that they are safe, at least, and secure within the barn. So that's free range, cage-free and free range systems. So what are the influences that we see to push producers towards a better welfare system? In Malaysia, these are a few of the things that I've seen, I've noticed, not just in Malaysia, but in basically our Southeast Asian countries. And also probably not just for eggs, but we can see with quite a lot of different animal products as well. The first thing I want to say is health. I think a lot of people are much more aware of the benefits of organic farming, so organic eggs, organic meat, organic vegetables, for example. And unfortunately, organic eggs does not mean cage-free eggs. So sometimes they can still be kept in battery cages, but maybe given better quality food. But the thing is, people can choose cage-free or better welfare system. One thing is because they believe that it could lead to better health when they consume those eggs. Next one is we're looking at some commitments. So I'll talk about this in a bit, but we have lots more NGOs coming in to push for commitment in terms of both the producing side and also the retail and the use side, consumption. Product variation. So right now, I would say if you go into a supermarket here in Malaysia and you go to the egg aisle, you can see lots of different types of eggs, and sometimes you can be quite confused. Instead of just having normal eggs, or I mean, instead of having just either chicken or duck eggs, you can have lots of variation. So we have right now, we have like things like omega-3 eggs. We have like selenium eggs. We have like low cholesterol eggs or low caloric eggs. I don't know, lots of different variation for different types of eggs. In a way, it is one of the reasons is because the producers themselves need to have various different types of products so that they can sell their eggs. So it's a marketing tactic for them. One of the other reasons is because there's a ceiling price to normal table eggs. So government has introduced price control for normal eggs. So sometimes they can't earn as much from there, so they have to develop different types of eggs so that they can get more profit from the other types of eggs. So because of this product variation, I think people will start to question like what it is. Like it can introduce people to start thinking about how it is, what is the eggs, where the eggs are coming from, how is it better from other products as well. Public demand, I don't need to say this so much. I mean, public demand at the end of the day does goes back and influence the supply side of things. And in Malaysia, particularly, we do have agro-tourism. And agro-tourism is where city folks who has never seen farm animals, they go out and see farm animals. So they get introduced to more cage-free style of farming, or question like how chickens are actually farmed. So all these things can lead to better welfare systems for chickens. We do have NGOs here pushing for, especially what do you call it, fast food chains that uses a lot of eggs, and also not just that, but also like, for example, supermarkets get pushing them to start selling cage-free eggs, for example. So these are some of the ways that we can push the whole industry. We do have now cage-free trackers. So some organizations are looking at companies that actually made public commitment towards cage-free eggs. And also, well, this is from Indonesia, so we don't have in Malaysia yet, but there's a list of where people can go and get cage-free eggs. So this is much needed. It tackles a lot of the demand and tackles a lot of the demand and supply side as well. Certified Humane is one of the certification company that actually can look at animal welfare certification. So this is not organic, this is animal welfare certification, and in particular they can come and certify either free range or cage-free eggs. And we do have a couple of brands here. This is in Singapore, but this is definitely available here in Malaysia. So we actually we can be assured that at least the welfare situation of these eggs is much better than a lot of other eggs that you see in the market. Right, I'll talk a little bit about the transitioning and how some farmers can transition from a battery cage system to a cage-free system. And I just want to say that a lot of times the barn that's used in a battery cage system can actually be changed into a cage-free system. They just need to take out all the cages inside of it and let the chickens free, and and also provide the resources that they need. So this is the most low-cost way of transitioning from battery cage to a cage-free system. So resources that you can provide to them is, for example, the litter on the floor for them to dust bathe, for them to forage. You can provide nest boxes for them to lay eggs in. You have homemade nest boxes made of wooden boxes. You can also provide places for the animals to perch as well. So these are all important resources for the chickens. You can also go one step further, open up a door for the chickens to come out of the barn, so you can have a free range system. So it does not have to be very high cost to do all these things. You can, once you do that, like these are all manual feeders here, but then you can also start to do automation as well. So you can see, for example, here would be the conveyor belt feeder. So you can actually add automation even with the eggs as well. You can add conveyor belt here to collect the eggs, which is what in a lot of big layer farms, big battery cage farms do. They collect the eggs via conveyor belt, so they depend less and less on human manpower. And in cage-free farming, it's very possible as well to do all that as well. So you can slowly transition from a more manual system to a more automated, intensive system. Here is a cage-free system, which is one floor, one layer. So you can see that you can provide food. You have purchase on this side, nest boxes with conveyor belt systems on that side, substrate with some floor litter, maybe rice husk on this side. So it provides enough resources for the chicken's welfare. And you can also have this. This is the most high end. This is the most expensive setup in terms of cost. But this means that you can actually put in more chickens inside that the space that you have, but at the same time still provide enough resources to fulfill the chicken's welfare needs. So it looks like it's crowded, but actually, the chickens can still walk around, they can still stretch, they can still dust bathe on the floor, they can still nest in privacy. They can perch, they can run away from the dominant chickens so that they avoid feather pecking. So you can see, if you have a system like this and you can manage it well, then your chickens can stay healthy even up to the end of day. And in fact, when you look at the productivity of those chickens, and I can say that a lot of these chickens will lay more eggs at the end of when they are older compared to battery chickens as well. So in a way, you can actually produce more eggs in this kind of system. And a lot of times we feel that, oh, the producers are so negative, they won't produce and everything, but not necessarily. So we do have a survey done and asking producers' perspective. And if you ask them if it's possible, actually majority of them say it is feasible to convert into a cage-free system. But what kind of help do they need to convert into a cage-free system? You can see that majority of them want more training and want more advice, sometimes a little bit of finance and like marketing strategy as well. But the good news is there are now quite a lot of opportunities for training. So here is an example done by Global Food Partners. It's a model farm in Indonesia where we do trainings in terms of how to set up a cage-free system. And also some NGOs are coming in and providing some financial support as well. So if you are smart, there are avenues for you to go around and get the resources you need to start cage-free farming. So that's with chickens. I'll move on to a couple of other species that I've mentioned earlier on. So here we go, ducks. I think Malaysia is quite lucky that we do have, like in the past, we do have a lot of tin mining. So that means we actually dig up a lot of, dredge up a lot of the earth, and it converts into ponds right now. Once it fills up, once the rains come, it fills up with water, it converts into ponds. So all these unused old mining pools a lot of places they use it to convert it into duck farms. So these ducks are quite good. They have access to water, and it's kind of almost natural body of water for them to fulfill their needs. But also at the same time, we do have slight intensification in duck farms as well. So we do have duck farming that is indoor, in-house, something like this as well. We just need to remember that ducks can live, can grow, can produce in this kind of systems, but uh, a lot of times when we're talking about duck welfare, ducks need that access to water. So if you have these systems like this, we need to remember to provide water. We can provide it by giving it shower, or we can like convert small areas into pools where they can actually go down and dip, have a swim. It's a way for ducks to clean themselves. So that's why you can see ducks grown like this. You can see their feathers are not clean, they're dirty. But ducks grown like this with access to water, they're much, much more cleaner as well. But similar to chickens, as I mentioned before, all the other resources that chickens need, ducks would need as well. So they need space to run around. They need a place to nest. They might not need a place to perch, but definitely place to nest. And substrate for them would be useful as well. Pigs, the other major farming industry in Malaysia, and unfortunately, I would say, in terms of welfare, this is still quite way behind, especially if you compare it with a lot of Southeast Asian countries. In a way, because they are being kept in sow crates and they are being kept there most of their lives. This is highly restrictive of their movement, so all they can do is stand up and lie down. They can't even turn around. And of course, once you do that, they can't perform their natural behavior. So pig, naturally, they need places where they can root around, dig around the substrate. They like to wallow in well, we think about wallow in mud, but actually, if they have a body of water, they would like that as well. A lot of times, the welfare issue with pigs is hunger, because we feed them highly nutritious food where they can consume it with a short period of time. So if you look at pigs in nature, they spend most of their time digging and rooting and eating very small amounts of food, because the overall amount that they need, they take hours to fulfill their caloric needs. But in this kind of farming, it only takes like half an hour to fulfill all of the caloric needs. So what do? They can get quite hungry, although the caloric uh, requirements is fulfilled. They still can get very hungry, and they can get a lot of behavioral problems, especially with the need for chewing. So you'll see most of the time they will spend their time here chewing on these bars. So in pigs we call this bar biting. And there are painful management procedures as well for pigs, which we still do quite routinely. Cattle in Malaysia, we have lots of different types of cattle farms. You can have this kind of herding, by the side of the road, where they eat grass wherever they go. You can have a feedlot place where they are kept in small groups and then they are given high nutritious food. Same with dairy as well. They can be kept in this kind of situations, or sometimes even like maybe they have a few cows, then it can be tethered, what do you call that, like tied up with the nose ring, tied up to one spot so they don't go around. A lot of the main issues with cattle farming in Malaysia is the genetics and whether it is really suitable for our Malaysian weather. So if we get a lot of cross breeds, for example, to produce high amounts of milk, what happens is that the metabolic requirement to produce that high amount of milk also produces a lot of heat which they cannot dissipate. So a lot of times they don't really do well in our weather. And for our local cows that actually is adapted to our weather, unfortunately, what we're seeing here is that the growth rate is very poor. So they take a long time to grow, and maybe they don't grow to a very big size. So genetics is a challenge here with cattle farming. I've seen lately also this kind of cattle is being introduced. So cattle with highly muscular style, or we have the limousine breed, or sometimes we have the Belgian blue breeds, which have what they call double muscling, and this can lead to lots of different types of genetic and welfare issues. For example, um, a lot of them need cesarean section instead of being able to give birth properly. Their double muscling, for example, can cause quite a painful lifetime for them for to move around. So there's lots of other welfare issues with this, but it's only just starting here, so we'll see whether they are adapting here or not. The ability to go out and graze. So sometimes they are not allowed to go out and graze, or maybe they're just left outside out there in the elements. It can be a problem. We still do have perform some painful management procedures. I've mentioned about tethering. Lameness in cattle is actually quite a big problem. So the bigger they are, the more important to take care of their feet. And if they have lameness, it can be quite painful and quite a big welfare issue for cattle. Goat farming in Malaysia is not too bad, I would say. You are usually kept in this kind of system. You can see like raised platform, they are kept in the shades like this, but also a lot of times they will be allowed out access to roam around for a couple of hours every day, to feed on the grass outside. So actually the farming itself is pretty good in terms of welfare. So it's not too bad. Earlier on I mentioned about frog. The one of the thing is that we don't really know what frog needs, but we know that they might probably not be very happy in conditions like this. So it's frog farming does exist in Malaysia, but we don't know the extent of its welfare problem. We don't know the extent of how many farms there are in Malaysia as well. So those are some of the welfare issues that I'll highlight in this presentation. So in a very short amount of time, hope that it's enough for me to contribute to explain some of the welfare situation in Malaysia.
Thank you so much, Dr. Natasha Lee. It's such a detailed presentation to share with us what's going on in Malaysia with animal farming. For those who have just joined, please feel free to indicate your questions here. My name is Wani and I'm from Welfare Matters. I'm helping to moderate the Q&A session over here. We have about 7 minutes left, but we have some questions that I would just read out to you, Dr. Lee, if it's okay.
Sure.
First, Amir from Philippines, it has a question about the kinds of chickens that exist in Malaysia. In the Philippines, one is native chicken, the other one is broiler for commercial purpose. His question is whether Malaysia has the same kind of chickens in terms of that types of differentiation. The native chickens over there are more expensive than the broilers. Yeah, so I think maybe just a comment about that.
Yeah, we do have what we call kampong chicken around here, which is basically our native chicken, but the proportion, if you look at the numbers, it's actually very small compared to the other commercialized broilers and layers. The broilers and layers, I think we use quite a lot of the commercial mixed breeds.
Thanks. I also want to have a quick mention that Ambu from Singapore has actually asked quite a lot of questions. But your fellow advocate in Malaysia, Eileen, has also helped to answer everything. So I would say I won't be going through those questions. And for the sake of time, I'll move on to the next one. For another question here, we have one from Lefteris, who is also from Mathematics. Interested in the proportion and number of farms in Malaysia that are battery cages or closed systems versus free range. Does the DVS report share what kinds of what are the number of farms and sizes of the farms that exist in Malaysia for layer hens?
No, I haven't seen any reports in terms of the types of farm that the DVS reports on. But I can safely say maybe 99.9% of your eggs comes from battery cage eggs.
And is there any way to, if someone is interested to know the numbers, to be able to find out more?
Very good question. You probably need to almost do your own survey with the producers and see how many they are producing themselves. And a lot of times I would say it's the smaller scale producers that are starting to experiment with cage-free systems. So as I mentioned, agritourism farms, those kind of farms are definitely cage-free. But commercially, I would say very few.
Right. Yeah. That's really helpful to know because yeah, you've been working in this space for so long, and knowing that it's hard to get the numbers is a very interesting thing to know about. We also have a question about whether there's any website or resources of recommended cage-free farms in Malaysia. I'm not so sure if the person is thinking more of a sourcing in Malaysia, where there might be a list.
Certified Humane has a list, so you can probably go and check from there. Unfortunately, it's only one farm here in Malaysia at the moment. We do have well, it's in Singapore, the other farm. And for broilers, we have one farm in Malaysia, but they are the certified birds are actually for export into Singapore. There are a few other farms, I believe, are trying cage-free as well, but they are not necessarily certified by any particular certification body.
Okay. Hope that answers your question, Nidnoy. And this one would be from which? Would you be able to share the source scientific article that says hens in cage-free systems can have higher productivity towards the end of the cycle?
That is from my experience talking with several producers that have it. So I'm not sure whether it's in any publication papers as well. With a lot of farming, especially in Malaysia, they are very, very secretive. So they don't want to talk about how much they can earn and how well their chickens and producing. So I'm afraid it's I can share with you like this for now. If I'm not sure whether it's in a paper form, but I think quite likely you might be able to find some indications that it can lay longer.
Okay. And I think we also have a related question where you mentioned in the presentation that it producers in Malaysia think that the transition to cage-free system is feasible with proper support. So would you happen to have a source for us to learn more about this?
It's published. It's in a published paper. I've mentioned in the what do you call it, in the slide. I've mentioned the source of it. So if you want, let me cut and paste, drop it into.
I think you have an attentive audience who has stuck the paper over here.
All right.
So
Oh yeah. Okay. Cool. Wow. Okay.
yes, people are listening.
Awesome. Faster
Yeah.
than me.
That's great. So we have about another minute left. I think
I think you can look at the links from that paper and the researchers. Some of the papers, myself included, because it's a couple of surveys and the result was a series of publications, which we look into. Well, this was the producer's perspective, but we did look into some consumer perspective as well, and a few other things as well. So you can have a look, have a search for the links.
We are only at with 1 minute left, and we will likely close the session soon. But maybe for a lot of people here who are very interested in engaging with companies to engage them and try to get them to go source for more cage-free eggs, although you covered so many types of animals. You mentioned in your talk that there's a lot of pressure that came from EU for the transition, and you mentioned also a lot of influences for why people will be interested in a higher welfare products with animal products. Would you be able to share what would be the interest level of companies and farmers in Malaysia at the moment? What would entice them to potentially be motivated to change based on your experience?
I think well, lots of different things that can motivate them. I think the next generation of farmers, so the ones that has been exposed to different farming systems in different countries, they are much more open to change, I would say, like the younger generation. A lot of the farms, a lot of the big companies farms here are family owned, so if it's still run by the grandfather of the father or somebody in the mid age, I would say they are slightly more reluctant and slightly more defensive over their systems that they have been using for decades. But I think one of the things is, yeah, the next generation is much more open to change. Diversification of product, I think, is also another reasons why farmers are looking to change, because if they rely on the normal caged eggs or normal, what they call it, table eggs, it fluctuates in price quite a lot. So in terms of the cost, in terms of profitability, it's not very stable for them. So they can look at different types of eggs. And also, I think in terms of health reasons, if they do try cage-free and they see the difference in the chickens, I mean, like, if you see the difference in the chickens, would you eat eggs that come from a chicken that looks very sick, or would you prefer to eat eggs that comes from a chicken that looks healthy? So for them, the producers themselves, they can straight away say, it's like, I prefer these eggs. They are much more better for me, for my family, and also for the chickens.
That's so interesting to know about. Thank you so much, Dr. Lee, for your sharing. We wish we would have more time, but unfortunately, we're at the end of the webinar. I think that we'll send you over some of the questions that Ampul had also asked that Eileen has helped to answer. But over here, I would like to wrap up this webinar and thank Dr. Natasha Lee for your sharing and helping us to understand what's going on in Malaysia. If anybody has any more questions, feel free to send it over to us and we might forward it to the speaker. Before you leave, if you have some time, we would appreciate if you can drop your quick feedback here for us that Divya has shared. Once again, thank you so much for being here, and Natasha, for your sharing. We've learned so much from you tonight. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks for coming, everyone.
See you again. Bye.